What's going on, everybody? This is the Blockchain Backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we'll be talking about the Bitcoin price chart, as throughout the weekend, we officially have a lower low C leg put into place here for Bitcoin, something that has been covered extensively over here on the YouTube channel for several months at this point. And of course, we get our C leg to start happening here throughout the weekend during a period of typically less liquidity. And of course, we got a narrative to go with it to scare retail. Now, we've spent really months now talking about how the crowd never returned during any of this, so that this would likely be fear driven during a moment like this for the market, and that the retail crowd that's still here would be pretty scared because there's been no euphoria that has come back into the market. So any dips that are going to happen in here are going to be very fear felt. In addition, of course, as is typical with markets, whenever these things happen, what happens? We get a narrative to go along with it, right? There was escalation in geopolitical events throughout the weekend. But as we sit where we're currently at right now, the big question is whether or not the bottom is already in, right? Now, of course, with events happening, narratives, retail being very fearful, of course, everyone's going to jump to the conclusion, you have to pay attention to the geopolitical events. Everything is going to hit the fan. But that wasn't true when the tariffs were happening, right? Everything ricocheted back to the highs. Then we set into an ABC. And it's not that this ABC was in any way surprising, because we've been talking about this ABC all throughout even here. And as we were working our way back up, waiting for where is that ABC going to set in at? Is it going to set from here before we get into a new high? Or is it going to take the high? Like our examples in here where you don't set a new high or you don't set a new high. But in the example of back in 2024, we do set a new high before the ABC gets set in. We've talked about this in an absurd amount of YouTube videos, as you could see with the titles and thumbnails all pertaining to this ABC dating back for quite some time. It's also been written about over there in the newsletters, like this one from back in May. Bitcoin's done an amazing job ripping back to a new all-time high, which is something that absolutely happens when these corrective structures occur. However, this typically isn't a moment where broader crypto action gets really exciting. Typically, if Bitcoin continues to behave like this, we will see some form of a correction happen from these levels before the market really gets going, implying even when Bitcoin was at $108,000 that an ABC was still likely on the horizon. You guys, of course, know that here on the YouTube channel. This is from back on May 22nd, which is when Bitcoin's at $110,822, anticipating that there would still be this ABC correction to show up in here, even though price is at an all-time high. We can even go back into April when we were in our ride up at that point, April 28th. For when we would think an ABC correction would end up showing up in here, just as we typically see in these formats. Again, still unknown if it would set a new high before doing that, or be more like 2024 where it sets the new high. But back to the newsletter on the thoughts on where the price would end up going. Usually that's to the retracement levels around the 702, which is right here where Bitcoin got to yesterday, or the 618, which is somewhere in the zone of $95,000 to $97,000. And it's once that correction is complete and Bitcoin breaks from a bull flag that we see the entire market get exciting and retail starts to pour back in, right? So having this idea that an ABC correction would happen while we were still at the all-time high, and you guys know it, we repeated it extensively here throughout the YouTube videos to really just get to this moment. Now, when we get here, of course, retail sentiment gets very worried, very concerned. Everybody's being kind of pushed to their breaking point. So everybody wants to hear that the bottom is absolutely in and that it's up only from this point because they want the pain alleviated until more price action plays out. I can't definitively say that to be the case, but I can say that we can change our tone from being like, that C leg's probably going to be coming, to being like, all right, do we have the things showing that the bottom is actually in now? I don't think we have the answer today to say that. We're not seeing the reaction happen throughout the entire cryptocurrency market that it's there yet. It doesn't mean it's not. There just hasn't been the evidence of it just yet. When we look at like what the minimum requirements have been for how deep these do pull back historically, typically they do go a little bit deeper than what we've already seen. However, in 2024, this was pretty much the exact amount of depth that we actually pursued for Bitcoin before things reversed. And I'll move a little bit of this off there to show that it does wick here below the 702 retracement, doesn't quite get back to that peak. And you can see that is really what just happened here for Bitcoin right now. Not quite getting back there. Going below that 702, not quite getting back there, going below that 702. So I think you could argue from a minimum requirement, you could say that it's been done. Problem is there isn't enough evidence. There's many cases that these things do double hit down in here before they end up reversing. A lot of times we'll come down here and we'll do moves like this, where we'll take the big plunge down in here, give a little bit of a bounce, and then it takes one more stab down here at the lows. And in this circumstance, right, it does end up hitting, which is a couple $100 lower than where it is right now, right? Or in this circumstance, a little bit deeper. However, it does it in one foul swoop. There is no secondary revisit of the lows. And then when Bitcoin did get this deep back in 2024, it was one foul swoop. There was no revisit of the lows a second time. It ricocheted, then pulled back down, but there was no revisit of the lows. So we're left with the complications of that still. And of course, this is very fresh. We're about to start a new week in the stock market after the developing geopolitical events throughout the weekend. Are there going to be any additional developments to the geopolitical events that cause any type of liquidity issues to emerge? And that's how we end up getting it. Either way, it's not unusual for us, of course, to have euphoria at the peak before the correction set in. And then by the time the correction does set in, we have fear, worry, concern, and narratives. So really here in the next couple of days, there's still no evidence here on the price chart at this exact moment to not be thinking that could still be in the cards right in here, where it still is going to just come down into these levels right in here. Obviously, one of the hard things about 2024 is that what it looks like an A, B, C, and then it bounces out of there. It gives a pretty convincing bounce, and then it rolls itself back over. That's still always a concern in there, but I actually think that is what this is all right in here, and then rolls over and goes and kerplunks its way down in there. So I think we're actually already beyond that if that is the case. So if we do actually end up getting a break up here in the coming days, it's likely a good sign that that was it. The difficult thing about the recovery happening in here is that it's less common, as you can see, that we actually just climb up and then just go straight on out of there. It's actually more common that it's kind of a bumpy road to get to the bull flag and then the break happens, right? That it's kind of a bumpy road to get to the bull flag and then the break ends up happening in there. So right now, today and tomorrow, it's going to be more of kind of watching these levels to see if rejections come in here to go ahead and get that final dip to happen. But if we see a bigger reaction come out of here in the next couple of days, it likely implies that's the bottom. Still bumpy. We can all cheer for it to be very smooth, just like this. I'm all for it, but just know that they can many times just look like this, getting their way back up before that bull flag gets put into play, and then the break ends up happening. So, right, it's no longer talking about it from the lens of being like, we still have to ABC. You could see that we have ABC'd. You could see that we've gone down to depths of levels that have marked lows before. But as we kick off this week, it's now going to be time to watch, all right, is it going to go ahead and hit that bottom a second time? Or do we get more evidence of it popping out in here? Even if it does pop out, we still have to look through it in the lens of it could be like this to get its way out and not give us something nice and beautiful and just go straight line up. But right now, the main thing we're watching for in here is to say, is the bottom of the C leg completely in? In some circumstances, the minimum requirements have already been met, but now we need to see follow through price action to imply it. If Bitcoin does roll over and set a new low, I'll feel much more confident coming on here and being like, this is it, watching for bottom, watching for bottom, watching for bottom. Otherwise, I still have to kind of remain on edge in this particular moment right in here in case that's it. And because I know how retail sentiment is when we're in moments like this, a lot of fear, everybody's paying attention to the news wire. It takes prices getting lower and it takes fear to set in, and everybody's going to just, if you say the bottom is in and there's not 100% undisputable evidence in there, and then it goes and sets a new low, everybody gets infuriated. Oh no, something must be wrong. Right. And so being mindful of my words in that circumstance right there and showing you why, right? Because you can go down and hit these a second time. You can push down into these levels. However, a bigger ricochet out of here implies that likely was the bottom. It's less common to go in a straight line up, but to be a bumpy path to get back to the bull flag. But a bigger push up would imply it's far more likely that was the bottom. That's it. To look at that through another lens on why it's difficult to say for sure that was it, because you could look over here at total, right? So total does do what we're talking about here, where it doesn't actually set the new high right? This is the entire market cap of the entire cryptocurrency market. We could see we go into our ABC correction in here, right? Coming up short of the high, as in this example. But like we're talking about in here, in this example, being referenced to over here, where, right, it takes out this low, there's your C leg, and then it goes on and it has one more hit down to the lows, like we're talking about in here. If there's no major reaction in here, this comes down and hits that low, right? For this example right here, which I now have right here next to total as I'm recording today on Monday morning, you can see those are still very similar, and that still is in play in here, where Bitcoin holds below that support level. After the big plunge happens, back tests that level, then there's the one more push down, which you can still see here, right? So there's your A leg pulling down in here, right? There's your B leg. And currently, as I'm recording here on Monday morning, you can still see it still sits there below the A leg as we did right in here. So it's hard to say definitively that for sure is the low until price action either proves it by breaking out, or we go ahead and see the next low get set in here. And then we start, looking for evidence to start posting rocket ships, which I'm definitely tired of talking about an ABC correction. So we've gotten here, and finally we can start getting to the point of this thing being over, because I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing about it. I've been talking about it on videos, been writing about it in the newsletter, back in April, right, when we're coming out of tariff stuff in here, saying, looking for that to happen and implying that we will have that ABC correction eventually come in, which of course is taken from an idea from back in February, thinking that we were in these types of levels in here for Bitcoin, and that it would be some type of plunge that would eventually get back up here to then ABC from the February 15th newsletter, which of course was talked about in YouTube videos at that time. You've seen enough YouTube videos about it way ahead of time before we even got up in here. And, this is in no way a braggart thing. I get plenty of things wrong. Now, this is just what typically happens for Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency market when we get into these types of environments, that you look for these ricochets back to the highs. Then we put in these ABCs. Are typically very fear driven. That's why we focus so much on retail sentiment. Where is the crowd, knowing that this thing would be fearful? It's just so common. We see narratives end up coming when things get scary. The crowd is already fearful. They get a narrative that scares them. We dip down into the price levels that we should be dipping down into. We are very, very, very close to not having to talk about an ABC correction anymore. And it's really just all defined by the evidence being proven right in here. If we're going to end up seeing just this one more dip end up coming in here, and then once that happens, we're done. There is no more ABC discussion to be having in here anymore. And I am looking forward to it, because we have been talking about this since back in February. And it is now June 23rd. The difficult thing, of course, has been the Bitcoin dominance. And a lot of the discussions have been that we wouldn't see the dominance collapse until we could get to that environment right there where that bull flag happens and the breakout actually ensues and the thing gets out of here. Sure enough, that's been the case. The Bitcoin dominance continues to climb. And the irony thing that I find is that we're nearing this moment that's going to end up being what I believe to be the final parabolic push for Bitcoin for the entire cycle, right? Whenever we reach these ending phases, that's typically where we see altcoins do very well, not only just in the structures that we're talking about of when we come out of these ABCs and we break out. We just saw that happen back in 2024. But of course, when you're reaching cycle ends, that's when you tend to see the altcoin market massively outperform Bitcoin too. But, we've been talking about this thing since February. Here we are, we're approaching it. Now it's time to get ourselves lined up to get that bull flag breakout. And here we are, we're going to have Bitcoin dominance right back at the very last retracement level at this time. There's no more retracement levels beyond this. This is the last one. Could it be that it is this right in here, that there's this little push to happen right in here that's just left in here, that's enough juice for Bitcoin to have its little push up to get it? That's the bottom of Bitcoin. That's the start of the parabolic push for the market. And that becomes the ending of all of it. Because even like I just outlined in that newsletter that I kind of started the video with, that Bitcoin has done an amazing job ripping back to a new all-time high, which is something that absolutely happens when these corrective structures occur. However, this typically isn't the moment where broader crypto action gets really exciting. Typically, if Bitcoin continues to behave like this, we'll see some form of correction happen from these levels before the market really gets moving. Usually that is the retracement levels around the 702 or the 618, somewhere in the zone of 95 to 97,000. And it's once that correction is complete and Bitcoin breaks from a bull flag that we see the entire market get exciting and retail starts to pour back in, pointing again to that bull flag over there that we typically see be the breaking point. And so if this pans out and we can get our way into that bull flag in there, Is that where we see it happen? And here we are reaching our last retracement level at this particular moment. So does this also give us a little bit of a clue that Bitcoin is going to do that little dip like we're seeing over here on total? And I'll take some of this off of here just to show that again, that we sit right underneath here, right here at the very ending. It's possible, but this is where emotions run high in markets. This is where everybody's paying attention to the news wire, right? With everything going on right now, this is the thing where people are checking the news constantly. People are constantly on edge, watching the news. They're looking for anything and everything to dictate their decision making based on news. We joke often a lot about magical unicorn fairy dust, puppet masters pulling the puppet strings, God, or a simulation. And how many times throughout history have we seen it that we finally get down to price levels that we're supposed to be reaching to, and we all have something to be very fearful of, or the news is at least trying to instill some level of fear. So we'll get through these couple of days in here. XRP sits here in this $2 area. I think it as well is just waiting for that moment for Bitcoin to complete that. Once that happens, we should see the price of XRP pop its way back up. Still not going to be convinced that it's ready to fully break out just yet, in the event that there is a lot more kind of climbing that's going to happen in here, but that should mark the low as well for XRP. Again, not everybody's favorite thing to hear that you are dictated and tied to Bitcoin, but it's the reality. So in the coming days, just about trying to survive this moment right in here, probably opportunities galore. Then the second we see the evidence emerge that either this is completed or we're already done, we will acknowledge it right away. Either way, we've been talking about this since February. It's now late June. Guys, we're like right at the very end of it. All of our discussions of getting back to these levels, we're doing it. So the news wire is likely to be filled this week. Expect if we do end up seeing that, like we're talking about there on total, if it's just got this little dip to go and make, expect it to be like on social media, to be like somebody stepping on an ant pile and the ants just flying everywhere. It's what social media will probably be like. As for me, it's been rough having to talk about this ABC so much. It's been rough putting it in the thumbnails and making it the thing that I've only been able to talk about for so long. I've been so sick of it for so long. I'm so happy to like be at this moment now where we're not talking about it being like there's an ABC still playing out, right? It's, we're looking for the bottom of it now. And this will be where retail sentiment gets totally flipped, massively bearish at this point. And this is where we'll be fighting against the bearish sentiment and the wall of worry climb now to get to that bull flag to break out. But we just got to get through this little period here, right here, to see how this kind of pans out really quick. Expect the ants to be flying all over the place on social media, but we'll get through it together. And the second that it looks like it's like definitively done, we will definitely acknowledge it. And heck, I'll put a rocket ship on a thumbnail. But all right, that's going to be it for this one, guys. Of course, you could check out the newsletter over here at blockchainbacker.substack.com. The most recent one was posted there a week ago with Bitcoin's range-bound sea leg, then off to the races, the short-term bumpy path to escape to new heights, capitulation, then Bitcoin and altcoin expansion. So capitulation obviously being in play right now. So check that out at blockchainbacker.substack.com. There are links in the descriptions of all of my videos to the newsletter right there, blockchainbacker.substack.com. Otherwise, have a great day, guys. Expect it to be a busy week, and we will handle it together. But that's going to be it. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.